The first thing Tanaka registered was the smell. Antiseptic, sharp and sterile, a scent that scoured the senses and left behind a chemical ghost. The second was the sound, a soft, rhythmic beeping that seemed to count out the seconds of his new, diminished reality. He opened his eyes to a world of bleached white ceilings and pale green walls, a landscape of clinical indifference. He tried to shift, to sit up, to throw off the thin blanket that felt as heavy as a burial shroud. His arms responded, weak and trembling, but his legs, nothing. They were alien things, lumps of flesh and bone that belonged to someone else's body, unresponsive to the frantic signals his brain was screaming at them. A cold dread, colder than any fear he had ever known in a life defined by it, flooded his veins. He was a statue from the waist down. The doctor had come and gone, a man with a kind face and cruel words. Severe trauma to the T10 vertebra. The spinal cord is irreparably damaged. Paralysis is permanent. Each word was a nail hammered into his coffin. But the final nail was delivered by his wife. Akira appeared in the doorway not as a vision of comfort, but as a portrait of pristine departure. She wore an elegant beige coat over matching trousers and a crisp white shirt, an outfit chosen for travel, not for vigil. Her face, usually a mask of careful devotion, was unreadable, her posture rigid. She did not approach the bed. She stood framed by the doorway, a perfect silhouette against the harsh corridor light. "The family cannot withstand this," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished stone. There was no tremor of grief, only the flat finality of a business decision. "The elders have agreed. Your position will be managed. I have been advised to secure my future." He stared at her, the woman who had sworn loyalty, who had benefited from the empire he had built with blood and fear. He saw no love, no sorrow, only a chilling pragmatism. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability. "You are leaving me," he stated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I am leaving a ghost," she corrected, her gaze sweeping over his inert form in the bed. "The man I married is gone. This," she gestured vaguely at him, "is something else. Something I cannot be bound to." She turned, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum, a sound that echoed the finality of a closing door. And then she was gone. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound left, a mechanical witness to the moment his world had not just broken, but evaporated. The days that followed were a descent into a gray, soundless abyss. Ren refused food, refused to speak, refused the physical therapists who came with their false smiles and patronizing encouragement. He lay in his bed, a fallen emperor in a kingdom of one room, marinating in a potent cocktail of rage and self-pity. He willed himself to die, but his body, traitor that it was, stubbornly clung to life. Then she walked in. She was nothing like the others. Her light blue scrubs were plain, her hair was pulled back simply, and her eyes held no trace of pity. They were direct, intelligent, and tired. She carried a clipboard that she placed on the bedside table with a decisive snap. "My name is Chloe," she said, her voice clear and without the hushed reverence he was accustomed to. "I'll be handling your physical therapy from now on. We start in 5 minutes." Ren turned his head to the wall, a gesture of dismissal that had silenced rooms of powerful men. "Go away," he rasped. She didn't move. No, the single word, calm and unyielding, was so unexpected it made him turn back. "I am not your servant," he snarled, a flicker of his old authority returning. "I do not need a babysitter." Chloe looked at him, her expression unchanging. "You're right. You're not my master, and I'm not your babysitter. I'm the person who's going to teach you how to move from this bed to that chair without breaking your neck. I'm the one who's going to show you how to function in a world that isn't going to stop for you." She picked up the clipboard. "Your old life is over, Mr. Tanaka. This is your new one. We can start building it, or you can sit here and rot. The choice is yours. I get paid either way." Her words were a slap, a brutal, shocking dose of reality that cut through the fog of his despair. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than loss. He felt a spark of defiance. He stared into her steady gaze, a gaze that met his without fear, and made a decision. He would not rot. The sessions were a new kind of hell. Every movement was a battle against his own useless body, a symphony of straining muscles, searing nerve pain, and profound humiliation. The first time Chloe instructed him to use the overhead trapeze bar to lift his torso, his arms trembled so violently he collapsed back onto the mattress, sweat stinging his eyes. His immediate reaction was a guttural roar of frustration, a sound that once made men flinch. Chloe simply stood beside the bed, her arms crossed. "Anger is good," she said, her tone even. "It's fuel. Now use it." Again, she did not coddle him. She did not offer empty platitudes. When he cursed, she waited for him to finish. When he wanted to give up, she would simply outline the consequences: muscle atrophy, pressure sores, a complete dependence that would become his entire identity. She was relentless, a force of nature in pale blue scrubs. There were small, agonizing victories. The day he finally managed to hold his torso up for 10 seconds. The afternoon he successfully transferred himself from the bed to the wheelchair, his body screaming with effort, his arms feeling like they were being torn from their sockets. Chloe's praise was never effusive. It was a simple, quiet nod. "Good. Tomorrow, we do it twice, one afternoon." During a particularly grueling transfer, his grip slipped. He landed on the floor in a heap of tangled limbs and wounded pride. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over him. He expected her to rush over, to call for help, to fuss. Instead, she knelt a few feet away, her expression calm. "Okay," she said, as if this were part of the lesson. "Now listen to me. Plant your hands. Push your hips back. Use the leg of the chair for leverage. You can do this." He wanted to scream at her, to tell her to leave him there to die. But something in her voice, a firm belief he could not find in himself, compelled him to try. It took him 10 minutes, 10 minutes of agonizing, desperate struggle, but he pulled himself back into the chair. Exhausted and trembling, he looked at her. For the first time, he saw past the therapist. He saw the deep, unwavering strength in her. Later that evening, she brought him a cup of jasmine tea. She didn't say anything about the fall. She just sat in the visitor's chair and watched the city lights flicker to life outside his window. The silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice rough. She turned from the window, a small, weary smile on her face. Everyone deserves a chance to fight. The world outside the hospital walls began to intrude, not with messages of support, but with the cold mechanics of his dismantling. A man in a sharp suit, a lawyer with the predatory eyes of a shark, arrived one morning. He spoke of legal petitions and asset division, his words sanitized and sterile as he presented Ren with the official divorce papers from Akira. It was all there in black and white. She was claiming the Tokyo penthouse, the villa in Kyoto, a controlling interest in his legitimate front companies. She was methodically erasing him from the life he had built. The signature line at the bottom of the page seemed to mock him, a demand for his consent to his own execution. Days later, Ruji came. His former second-in-command, a man whose loyalty Ren had never questioned, entered the room with a theatrical display of grief. He bowed deeply, his face a mask of sorrow. "Oyabun," he murmured, using the old title of respect. "To see you like this, it is a tragedy for us all," but Ren, honed by a lifetime of reading men, saw through the performance. He saw the flicker of calculation in Ruji's eyes, the barely concealed ambition. This was not a visit of loyalty, it was a reconnaissance mission. Ruji was here to confirm the rumors, to see the crippled lion with his own eyes, to measure the throne for himself. Ruji spoke of stability, of keeping the organization strong during this transition. The subtext was clear. Ren's reign was over. When he left, Ren's hands were clenched so tightly on the arms of his wheelchair that his knuckles were white. He was a king in exile, his kingdom being carved up by vultures while he could only watch. Chloe entered the room a few moments later to prepare him for his afternoon session. She saw the storm on his face, the raw fury in his eyes. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't need to. "That man," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the door Ruji had just walked through. He didn't come here to give you respect. He came here to take the rest of it. Her perception was so accurate, so incisive, it startled him. She saw not just his physical paralysis, but the slow, methodical paralysis of his power. She saw the truth. The illusion of progress proved to be fragile. In his desperation to reclaim some form of control, Ren pushed himself too hard in therapy, ignoring the fire in his shoulders until a sharp, tearing sensation sent him crashing back into a world of pain. A torn rotator cuff. The doctor prescribed rest, painkillers, and a complete halt to his upper body training. He was relegated back to his bed, a prison he thought he had begun to escape. The physical setback was a catalyst for a cascade of others. His phone, his one remaining link to the outside world, became a source of torment. An old associate called, his voice laced with fear, to whisper that Ruji was purging the organization of men still loyal to Ren. He was consolidating power, rewriting history, recasting Ren not as a fallen leader, but as a weakling who had abandoned his post. His legacy was being systematically poisoned. Then came the call from his financial advisor. Akira's lawyers had filed an emergency injunction, successfully freezing his personal accounts. They claimed he was mentally unfit to manage his own affairs, a danger to the marital assets. The irony was a dagger in his gut. The man who once moved millions with a single word now couldn't access enough money to buy a newspaper. He was trapped, penniless, and utterly dependent on the sterile charity of the hospital. He tried to call a trusted contact, a man who owed him his life, only to be met with a metallic, synthesized voice. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He had been cut off. The lines had been severed. The walls, once the boundaries of his empire, were now the walls of his cage, and they were closing in with suffocating certainty. Despair, a familiar and unwelcome ghost, settled over him once more, heavier than ever before. Every small gain felt like a joke, a prelude to a much greater loss. He was not just paralyzed, he was being erased. The final illusion of his old power was shattered when Ruji returned. There was no pretense this time, no false sorrow. Ruji entered the room flanked by two of his new enforcers, their presence a silent, suffocating threat. He didn't bow. He stood over Ren's wheelchair, a smug, proprietary look on his face. "I have come to offer you a way out," Ruji said, his voice smooth. "A retirement. A generous pension. You will live comfortably, quietly, far from the city. In exchange, you will sign over all remaining claims. You will formally name me as your successor, and you will disappear." It was a death sentence wrapped in a bow. An order to become a non-person. Ren could feel the silent pressure from the men behind Ruji, the physical intimidation that was now so potent against him. For a moment, the old, violent rage surged, but it was followed by something else, something cold and clear. He looked up at the man who had been his shadow for 2 decades, and for the first time, he saw him not as a subordinate, but as an opponent in a game he had forgotten how to play. Just then, the door opened slightly. It was Chloe, holding a tray with his medication. She saw the men, felt the palpable tension in the room, and paused in the doorway. Her eyes met Ren's for a fleeting second. Her presence, her quiet and unshakable strength, became an anchor in the storm of his fear and fury. He took a slow breath. "You mistake this chair for a tomb, Ruji," Ren said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of his old command. "But my mind is not buried here." He leaned forward slightly. "I know about the accounting discrepancies in the Shinjuku district. The ones you thought you buried 5 years ago. I know who helped you. It was a shot in the dark, a calculated guess based on a half-remembered rumor, but he delivered it with absolute certainty." He saw the flicker of shock in Ruji's eyes. It was enough. Ruji's composure cracked. He spat a curse, turned on his heel, and stormed out, his thugs trailing behind him. The room was suddenly silent. Ren was left trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer force of what it had taken. The bluff had worked. Chloe entered fully, placing the tray down. She looked at him, her gaze soft with a new understanding. "You're still in there, aren't you?" she asked. The confrontation left him utterly depleted. The adrenaline that had sharpened his mind and steadied his voice vanished, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The victory felt hollow, a temporary stay of execution. He was still a broken man in a broken body, his enemies were still circling, and his kingdom was gone. That night, the hollowness consumed him. He lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the hospital, a sound that had become the soundtrack to his ruin. Thirsty, he reached for the glass of water on his bedside table. His hand, shaking with fatigue, fumbled the grip. The glass slipped, falling to the floor and shattering with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. The noise echoed the breaking of his own spirit. He stared at the shards glittering on the dark linoleum, and something inside him finally gave way. It was not a violent outburst of rage. It was a silent, complete collapse. Tears, hot and shameful, began to stream down his face. He didn't sob or make a sound. He simply wept for the man he had been, for the power he had lost, for the absolute, crushing uselessness that was now his entire existence. The door creaked open and Chloe stepped in, her face etched with concern from the noise. She saw the shattered glass, and then she saw his face, stripped of its pride and fury, revealing only the raw, desolate grief beneath. He didn't try to hide it. He had nothing left to hide behind. "I had everything," he whispered, his voice cracking. "An empire, respect, fear, and it was all made of glass. One touch, and it all shattered." Chloe didn't speak. She walked past him, retrieved a dustpan and brush from a supply closet, and carefully swept up every last shard of glass. When she was done, she didn't leave. She pulled the visitor's chair close to his bed and sat down. In the dim light from the hallway, she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, firm, and real. "Glass can be beautiful," she said softly, her voice a balm on his raw soul. "But steel is what you build with. You're not broken, Ren. You're being reforged." In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of his life, he felt a connection more real and powerful than any alliance he had ever forged. It wasn't about power or loyalty. It was about one human being seeing another in their darkest moment and choosing to stay. It was the beginning of love. A new fire was lit within him, not the hot, destructive fire of his past, but a slow, focused burn. His purpose was no longer to rule, but to survive, and to build something new from the ashes. His first request to Chloe was for a secure, encrypted tablet. She acquired it for him without question, understanding this was a tool for a new kind of war. His hospital room transformed. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was now accompanied by the soft tapping of his fingers on the screen. He was no longer the Oyabun of the Tanaka Gumi. He was a strategist, a ghost in the machine. He reached out, not to his former soldiers, but to a different kind of army. Retired financial analysts, disgraced information brokers, and corporate lawyers who operated in the shadows. Men who owed him favors from a lifetime ago, favors he had never called in. He began to move. With surgical precision, he accessed hidden accounts and liquidated assets Ruji and Akira knew nothing about. He dismantled his own empire from the inside out, not with threats and violence, but with encrypted emails and international wire transfers. He was a phantom, selling off pieces of his past to fund his future. Chloe was his anchor. She was his partner. She made sure he ate when he forgot, forced him to rest when he was on the verge of collapse, and never missed a single physical therapy session. She pushed his body to heal while he pushed his mind to fight. She would sit with him late into the night, a silent guardian as he navigated the complex web of his former life. One evening, he looked up from his tablet and saw her watching him, a look of quiet admiration on her face. He had just finished dictating a message to his new lawyer, a message that would present Akira with an ultimatum. A generous, final settlement, coupled with irrefutable evidence of her family's own financial crimes that would be anonymously leaked if she refused. It was brutal, effective, and final. He had neutralized one of his enemies without a single threat of violence. "You are not the man I first met," Chloe said softly. He managed a small, tired smile. "That man is dead. I am what's left." The final piece of his old life that needed to be put to rest was Ruji. Through his network of information gatherers, Run learned something that made his blood run cold. Ruji, in his greed and arrogance, had partnered with a brutal foreign syndicate. They were finalizing a deal to begin trafficking young women through the ports Run once controlled. It was a line Run, for all his sins, had never crossed. His code, twisted as it was, had its limits. This was not about power or revenge anymore. It was about redemption. It was about ensuring the monster he had a hand in creating did not poison the world any more than he already had. He spent the next 48 hours in a frenzy of focused activity. He gathered every piece of data he could, shipping manifests, flight numbers, encrypted communications, the locations of secret meetings, and the details of the offshore bank accounts used for the transactions. He compiled it all into a single, anonymous, and undeniable file. He did not send it to his old contacts in the police, who could be bought. He sent it to an international anti-trafficking agency, an organization with no ties to his world and no reason to bury the information. The climax of his war was not a bloody shootout in a darkened warehouse. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He and Chloe were watching the news on the small television in his room. A breaking news report interrupted the broadcast. The footage was dramatic. Heavily armed officers raiding a luxury hotel, a series of arrests at the docks. The news anchor reported on a massive international sting operation that had dismantled a major human trafficking ring. And there, being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, was Ruji. The Tanaka-gumi, as the world knew it, was effectively decapitated, its new leadership arrested, its operations in chaos. Bryn watched, his expression unreadable, as the empire he had spent his life building crumbled to dust on live television. Chloe placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "Is it over?" she asked. He reached for the remote and turned off the television, plunging the room into silence. "That part of my life is," he said, turning to look at her, his eyes clearer than they had been in years. The victory was not in seeing Ruji fall. It was in knowing he had been the one to push him, not for revenge, but for something that felt almost like justice. A year later, the scent of antiseptic was replaced by the clean, salt-laced air of the ocean. The rhythmic beeping was gone, replaced by the gentle sound of waves washing against the shore. Rin sat on the terrace of a modern house perched on a cliffside, a house of glass and warm wood, designed with wide doorways and smooth floors. Every corner of it was a testament to a life rebuilt, not around limitations, but around possibilities. He was no longer a patient, nor was he a boss in the old sense. From a minimalist office with a panoramic view of the Pacific, he ran a small, highly successful, and entirely legitimate investment firm. His mind, once a weapon of fear, was now a tool for creation. He was dressed in simple linen trousers and a soft shirt. Beside him, Chloe stood, not in scrubs, but in a flowing summer dress that danced in the breeze. A simple gold band on her finger matched the one on his. They had been married for 6 months, a quiet ceremony with only the waves as their witness. The peace he felt was something he had never known, a deep, resonant calm that had settled into his very bones. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. The strength he felt in her touch was the same strength that had pulled him from the abyss. "I used to believe power was something you took from others," he said, his gaze fixed on the endless blue horizon. "Something you held over them." "I was wrong." Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder. "What is it then?" "It's what you build," he answered, turning to look at her, his love for her shining in his eyes. "It's the strength you find when you have nothing left, the connection you make when you think you're completely alone. You taught me that." He brought her hand to his lips. "I thought my world ended in that hospital room. I thought my life was over," she smiled, a beautiful, radiant expression that lit up her whole face. "It was," she said softly. And then ours began. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip towards the water, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The past was a ghost, a story belonging to another man. The future was here, in her hand, in the steady beat of his own heart, as vast and as hopeful as the ocean before them.